Default routes aren't just of the static variety. We can have dynamic default routes, and EIGRP gives us a built-in mechanism to advertise a default route and inject it into your autonomous system. So there are a few different ways of doing this. Firstly, you could redistribute static. But we're going to focus right now on using an inborn feature of EIGRP called the IP default network command, done in global configuration mode. What this does is it flags a network. It flags a classful network specifically. Emphasis on classful. If you do not point to a classful network perfectly classfully, as in, let's say the network does not exist in your routing table as a classful network, or you do not put it in a classful manner, it won't work. There are white papers that will tell you this also. So if I use the default network command, I better be pointing to a classful network, such as maybe 172.31, because as a /16 network, that's classful. So I could do that. And so you're going to announce this into your autonomous system. So then all of the other routers know the exit point of your autonomous system. Because if you just build a static route, a default static route, you're only helping out yourself. But if you then follow that up with the IP default network command, you're going to spread the word about that to your autonomous system. This is a big deal. We have to know how to use dynamic default routes in our environment for whatever routing protocol we may need. So we do the command IP default network. Is 172.31 a classful network? And it is. We can see it here. We would assume that we know how to get there with a classful route. And we do. We know it's local to our router as a classful route because we built a static route to make sure we had it as a /16. So maybe it didn't live as a /16. Well, guess what? We built it as a /16. And if you do this, the other routers in your topology, the downstream routers, will see this as a very interesting entry. D*, D*. That says if you don't have a better way to leave the autonomous system with maybe a default static route, use this. So we have flagged it. It is marked. It is a special EIGRP route that also says this is how to leave and go to the internet, go to the public network, go to places that you don't know about. There are two ways of getting EIGRP to advertise a dynamic default route. We could use the inborn feature, which is default network. That may not really look like an EIGRP feature, but it really is. We're going to do this, though. Let's redistribute a default route of the static variety, which is something that looks like this. We're going to redistribute that into the process and advertise that. So the router in your organization that has connectivity to the ISP could do this. And it's actually the more common approach for dynamic default routes in EIGRP. So we'll come here, and we're going to do this on R3. We're going to advertise a static default route on R3 into the rest of the network. So I'm going to look at my static routes, and I have a static default route. But the problem is that only helps me out. It only helps R3 out. We need to advertise that to the rest of the routers in my autonomous system, and I've got nothing to do that right now. And we can confirm that. So we'll do a show IP route, and there's nothing going on here for the dynamic routing elements. And you can see that the gateway of last resort is not set. Great. Okay. So in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to advertise this on R3. And how are we going to do that? Well, we have the static route already. That's just a traditional static route. We'll view it. So we'll look at that routing statement, which would be done in global config. We're going to take that information, that's information, on this router, and we're going to train EIGRP to start talking about it. So what we'll do is this. We'll say redistribute. Got to type these commands right. Redistribute, which is an import function. It's going to import the static routes. Now, there is something we're going to have to do here. We're going to have to set a metric. And that is the metric that we attach to the prefix. Now, the routing prefix is going to be that. It's going to be 0.0.0 to /0, okay? And I'm going to choose a metric that is just easy to type in. Okay? That is, in fact, going to set a really awful metric because one of these values, the first of the values, is the bandwidth parameter, and that's bandwidth 1 kilobit per second. But that's neither here nor there. That's not going to affect functionality of this. Now I've got this. I've got the redistribution going on. And if I look at my EIGRP topology table, what's going on there? Well, really, something pretty interesting. We see that we're advertising that network now. That wasn't there before, even though I didn't show it to you. I think you can recognize that. R static. Okay, so it came from a redistributed static route. So now, going over to R1, I'm going to reissue the show IP route, and we'll just look at the EIGRP information. And voila, we've got a D star X entry. The star is for candidate default route, which we can see here. The X says it is external. External EIGRP routes have a poor administrative distance of 170. Internal is 90, external is 170. Okay. And show IP protocols reflects it as well. So is that a default route? It is. But we're so caught up often in, well, that's a static default route. Well, here, that is a dynamic default route. And we can ping the internet now, as well as other routers would be able to ping. So if I were to go to R7, we would also see that dynamic default route. Very exciting stuff, because you're going to have exit points of your EIGRP autonomous system, and you need to advertise that through the autonomous system. You don't want to build default static routes everywhere in your topology pointing to R3. That wouldn't work well. You're going to do a lot of manual manipulation, and you're not going to be able to change that information on the fly. You'd have to manually type it in. It's not a good thing. But creation of your dynamic default route with the redistribute static command, well, that is a good thing.